People were, deeply upset, deeply concerned. People thought that they were going to make a life with Amazon. And now they're just left in the cold. They have bills to pay. They have mortgages.
All right. Hello. My name is Colin Dansapa. You're listening to Metropolis. You might even be watching Metropolis. Today's episode, Amazon's departure from Quebec. Anytime something happens with Amazon, there's one person I always think of. And he's right here with me. Mustafa Henaway, community organizer with the Immigrant Worker Center, author of the book Disposable Worker, Essential Work. Yeah. You've also worked at Amazon.
Yes, and we actually drove around together to an Amazon warehouse to snap a few pictures.
Yeah. How long did you work at that one warehouse?
Oh, it wasn't a very long time. It was less than a few months.
What was it like?
I mean, it's not. At first you think it's not the worst job on earth. It has a ideological tinge to it. Amazon tries to make you feel that you're going to have this long-term career, that you're part of a family, that you're sort of covered, right? And that you have these benefits, and then kind of slowly, all the things that you read on Glassdoor, pop up. I always remember there was one kind of review on Glassdoor. There's like, half the people just walk around on their laptops. You don't even know what they're doing. And then you're like, oh, yeah, it's kind of true. And everyone's following your metrics.
Well, yeah.
Right? And then all of a sudden, everyone's talking about the artificial intelligence cameras. And you keep working like normal, but you realize kind of all of the stress and all of the pressure, and that no one really is at the wheel, and I realized this, I was walking by the lunchroom one day, and I realized when the operations manager he also had his run sheet of what to do and what to tell people to do, and that everyone is meeting a quota. Right. Everyone is meeting a quota in this warehouse, and no one is actually in control. Everyone puts on the facade, but and I think to me that was the part that felt the strangest. It felt really like a Black Mirror episode.
Right. I think in that article you said it's very Big Brother.
Exactly. And for a lot of workers, it's not an issue, right? Like wages are an issue, or, maybe health and safety is an issue, but they don't really see the, being followed by AI cameras and sort of this Big Brother as being fundamentally the core problem with Amazon.
Right, of course, yeah. They're just like, oh, whatever.
It is what it is. And then for me, it was, to me, this is really the fundamental issue.
Well, we're talking about Amazon. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that little vignette into what it was like working there. It doesn't sound fun. It sounds very rigid.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, last week, Amazon Canada, they announced that they are laying off pretty much all employees across its 7 Quebec locations. That's 1,997 employees. Most of them full-time. These are employees in Laval, St. Hubert, Lachine, and Coteau-du-Lac. Those jobs will be ending between February 8th and March 22nd. Mustafa, I want to know, you've been following Amazon for a while, like kind of studying them, their practices, their effects on workers. I'm kind of curious. What was your reaction to the news last week that they were leaving Quebec?
I mean, for me, it was shock. And I think for a lot of people who had been active in our Amazon Workers Committee were extremely shocked. I mean, I think, a lot of people expected Amazon to do something, in terms of the successful union drive at DXT4 in Laval by CSN, and also a series of other organizing campaigns and pressure mounting on Amazon. The expectation was that they were going to do something, because for a while they weren't doing anything, right? But to close all of the warehouses, all of the facilities at the same time, I think to us it was like a kind of like a shock and awe. And I think it really, we had an emergency meeting with workers that day. People didn't know what to do. How do we talk to other Amazon workers about this? What are workers' needs? The impact of it that's going to be on workers. Obviously, there's a broader political context. And to me, my initial reaction also was that this was kind of symbolic of the bigger moment that was that's forming right now, right? This new conjuncture of like, this happened like 2 days after Jeff Bezos standing behind Donald Trump, right?
Yeah. What timing?
What timing? Exactly. And, because Amazon wasn't, Amazon is clearly anti-union and puts all of its power and effort and resources into fighting unions. But to close, 7 major warehouses and facilities is a massive move. And I think what I think makes workers feel vulnerable, or what makes even the shock even more sort of unprecedented, that kind of move must have made months ago.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like you just can't pick up and leave. You have to have a system in place to continue those deliveries, to continue, because it's a very fragile logistics system Amazon operates, right? So to be able to have the things that you need to deliver, maybe let's say in February or March, it's all very calculated, right? So
you have to plan ahead for that.
They have to plan ahead for it. It's not as chaotic or just in time, right? Amazon works on a system that they know in Quebec people start buying, I don't know, let's say they're planting things in March. So there's an assumption that you're going to need those things in certain fulfillment centers alongside, I don't know, cabana sucre related materials, because that's very unique to Quebec. So they planned this based on last year's sales. And so they try to predict where to put things in anticipation so that they can fulfill Amazon Prime orders. But but it's still, so obviously the shock is that this was actually not a shock, but Amazon had been hiding its cards the whole time after the union vote. But I mean, it really is kind of just this shock and awe moment, and sort of how we respond and how we respond with workers is still something we're processing and trying to chart a path.
Right. In the Breach article you published recently, you called it an aggressive shock and awe campaign designed not only to discipline workers here, but to send a message of intimidation across its global operations. I mean, I think the important thing to note, right, is you're talking about this successful unionization campaign in Laval. This was last May 2024. The Amazon facility in Laval became the second in North America, right, to successfully organize a union there. And I guess the chronology of events is you have this union that successfully forms in Laval at one of its Quebec locations, and then not even a full year later, they announced a shutdown, but not just of the Laval location, but of all of the locations. So why didn't they just shut down only the Laval one if that was going to be an issue for them? Which also they're saying it's not.
Well, I mean, this is it. I mean, so if in Quebec law, there's a few things that probably push them to this nuclear option, right? So because the union was certified in May 2024, Amazon has to carry out these negotiations, right, for the first collective agreement. And if Amazon is seen as negotiating in bad faith, or time passes, there's actually kind of a strict deadline where then the labor tribunal can demand and force arbitration for the first collective agreement. So, I mean, a lot of people were thinking... Here in Quebec. So a lot of people were thinking, okay, and this is what happens quite often, where, these difficult to unionize places with employers who are very anti-union kind of allow the union to first go, arbitration happens, it's not the greatest collective agreement, and then you decertify the union in the second agreement where employers have more leverage, right, and leeway.
How do they have more leeway in the second?
I mean, in the sense that their arbitration is harder to get, employers can lock out the workers.
Sure.
And then, or bring in a yellow union, decertify the union. There's no strict timeline like the first collective agreement.
Sure.
You have places who are on lockout for, months and months and months and even years, right? So there's nothing that forces employers to come to the table with the unions after the first agreement. So, this first agreement would have been really important because it would have set the first time in North America an actual collective bargaining agreement with Amazon, giving workers control. That would have really given impetus for the union's ALU, the Amazon Labor Union in New York, Staten Island, to go further. You have the campaign in North Carolina. You have several organizing drives taking place in the U.S., right? And they had the strikes in December. So, and the one thing that's also really important for Amazon and probably Amazon's decision making was that, you had the Walmart closure here in Quebec, right? So Walmart closed one store, and the store that was unionized.
The early 2000s, I believe.
Early 2000s, right? And the one store that unionized in Jolicoeur, with UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers, Walmart is just like, we're packing up and we're going, right? Couche-Tard actually did the same thing later on with CSN. Okay. They packed up and left. And, 2010, 2011, I think maybe even a bit later on, they also did the same strategy. They just closed their stores. But the thing is, there was a legal ruling that favored UFCW and that favored the Walmart workers, was that it was clearly anti-union measure and it was clearly retaliatory, right? So Amazon couldn't do the same thing. They just couldn't close the one in Laval because they did that, it would have been obvious.
Right.
So for them, it
would have been too similar to those previous
examples.
Right, yeah.
So for them, the only option was the nuclear option, and I guess Amazon read the writing on the wall that this would have been a clear benefit for them. You send a signal to everyone else trying to organize that we're serious, right? Because everyone, I think, for a while thought Amazon was not being serious, right? Like, in a sense, its only strategy was just to delay, right? Like, its big anti-union tactics was just like delay negotiation, like what they're doing in Staten Island, or in Europe, like in Italy, like just ignore the unions, right?
Just lengthen just the time that they...
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
And to really drag it out, right? Because Amazon knows
they have the finances to do that, right? They have the resources to do that.
They have limitless resources, right? They have limitless resources. In the sense that I think they would be like a G20 country in terms of their actual market capitalization, it's over $1 trillion, right? So,
I think just last year in 2022, they became a $2 trillion company.
Exactly. And so they have limitless resources. They're a company that's really based on high turnover. In the US, it's like 150%. So that's like 1 out of 30 Americans have worked or work for Amazon, right? So they know with the turnover, limitless resources, dragging it out, you're always going to get new workers who may be less sympathetic to the union. And so I think a lot of unions might have seen this as like, okay, let's go on the offensive. But at the end of the day, I guess Amazon saw this as like, this is an opportunity. We do this now. And we send a lesson to not just, we end the union campaign here and we send a lesson to everyone else, because now people are going to say, do you want to be like Quebec?
Right. Quebec, which has such high union standards, right? It has such higher labor protections than other places that even there they'll leave.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Or maybe they think because of the labor laws here that it's just not worth it, right? And that they can just sort of that they feel pretty confident that they'll never get a union anywhere else in North America.
So Quebec was the example to be made too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the head you put on the stake, right, on the front lawn, scare everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. There was there's a anecdote like one of Freud's doctors, had actually, was paranoid and had several dogs, and then believed the dogs were conspiring against them and actually shot one of the dogs as a lesson to the other dogs, right? It's kind of this moment that it's like, because it's very costly for Amazon, right? You're talking about 7 facilities. It's a major investment.
The second most populous province in Canada.
Exactly. And then because, to give it to subcontractors, so there's the cost of closing, the cost of transferring all the orders. But then, when you have a subcontractors don't come for free. Subcontractors also have to make a profit, right? So again, Amazon has to price that in. Amazon has to price in the fact that there's maybe less control, because one of the things Amazon, part of their corporate strategy is actually they don't spend any money on advertising outside of outside of Amazon Prime Video, but for their actual goods, they're sort of like hegemonic in the sense that it's all about customer loyalty. It's all about membership. It's all about guaranteeing that, when we say 1-day delivery, it's 1-day delivery. When we do free returns, we do free returns. Like the return consumer goods market in the U.S. is almost as close as the U.S. military budget.
Wow.
And so a large chunk of that is actually Amazon.
Right. Wow.
And so they spend hundreds of billions on returning goods for free.
Well, yeah. I guess that's how you get that loyalty, I guess, from
from
this regular consumer base.
Exactly. So now they have to factor that in. When things were being delivered directly by Amazon, maybe there was a sense of assurity. Do people or consumers trust Intelcom or another?
Could you talk a bit about how these contractors work and what they are, and what part they play in this Amazon business model?
So the subcontractors in what's called like a third-party logistics providers has always been a major thing. I mean, Amazon has always experimented with subcontracting in many ways. So there's Amazon Flex, where one way is Amazon misclassifies a lot of its subcontractors or workers. So in the delivery stations, when Amazon did this in 2017, they were called delivery service partners. But your office, you would run, let's say, the routes. You would rent the vans from Amazon. You would have a desk inside the Amazon delivery station.
But you're a subcontractor.
No, yeah, but you're a subcontractor. Amazon will train your workers and train you. And you simply get the goods from Amazon. But you pay Amazon $10,000 to become the subcontractor.
Sure.
And you can grow and expand your business independently.
Right.
But it's not even that you're a dependent contractor. You're essentially just paying Amazon to be able to maybe make a little bit of money on profit, as opposed to just being like a manager of several vans, that last mile vans.
That's really interesting.
So there's that aspect. And then there's the actual subcontractor, which, Amazon has always been relying on these other sort of logistics companies, major ones, so all the way from Canada Post to UPS or FedEx, or to local companies. And because even a lot of these delivery providers will rely on these other smaller companies, which will then bring in, I'm going to work, as a Intelcom. I'll give you an example. So Intelcom is a last mile delivery company. It's one of the major subcontract for Amazon here in Quebec. It has its own warehouses. Trucks will deliver those packages to an Intelcom warehouse. Intelcom warehouse will either directly deliver them, or they'll say, how about you become a broker for us? We'll give you maybe 10 routes, 700 packages a day. You don't deliver them yourself. You're going to hire your friends to work for you now to do the deliveries, $3 package, right? And these subcontractors, they have to pay their own gas, bring their own car, and they're paid by the piece, not by the hour. So even if they have to go all the way from here to Laval and maybe working 15 hours a day, they're only paid by the package, not by the hour of work.
Oh, wow.
So the conditions are much worse, more unstable, but it's still Amazon. It's still Amazon profiting. It's still Amazon controlling the process. So this is really how Amazon subcontracting works.
Wow. What a mess.
Yeah,
what a mess of like with that, my read is you just get kind of like they don't have to be accountable for those kinds of people, right? Or they get to put some distance between them despite still making a profit off them.
exactly. There's a huge distance, right? So I mean, even then, it's really hard to think about how many people actually work for Amazon, right? So Amazon,
Right, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So 1.5 million people work for Amazon across the globe. That's only direct employees. So we're not including the drivers who are delivery service partner drivers. People have estimates of 300,000. Then you have all these other flex drivers and subcontractors working for Amazon. So clearly the numbers add up because Amazon only counts its direct employees.
Wow. I want to go back to the Amazon Workers Committee you were talking about. You mentioned before. You're saying the reaction was one of shock. I'm kind of curious how the actual Amazon workers, what people are saying, the ones you've spoken to who are affected by these layoffs.
Well, there's a lot of questions, right? So, a lot of workers were just, upset. A lot of workers are trying to figure out what's going to happen to them next. If you're studying, it's hard to get employment insurance because you're supposed to be studying, not working. So a lot of international students, they might not even get the EI. A lot of people are worried about the general economic climate. It's very hard to get a job now. Unemployment has been rising. So to be laid off in a moment where you have rising unemployment is not the ideal situation. And it's for Amazon to be giving 14 weeks. So for some workers, it's only going to be 8 weeks of pay because they've gotten 4 weeks of notice or 3 weeks of notice. So it's actually not that much. So workers are very scared about what they're going to be able to do in 2 months and how they're going to survive. And also because any support becomes less, right? So a lot of working people are barely making ends meet now. So a lot of these workers, they have bills to pay, they have mortgages, they have payments. You have whole families who work inside Amazon often.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of them are like, okay, now we just took a pay cut. Unemployment insurance is 75% of your net, 55% of your gross. So it's a massive, people are going to be living on the poverty line or below. So this is a huge issue. People are relying on Amazon's benefits. They won't have access to them after the 14 weeks. So it's a major crisis for a lot of these people.
I can imagine. Is there any kind of blame being put on the union for this? I see some like accounts online and like let's say some like articles from CBC where they spoke to some workers and the workers are kind of like they're like, oh, it's because of the union. We got like there's this question of union greed, it seems, at least to some degree. But I'm kind of wondering if you're getting any sense of that or how you respond to that kind of framing.
Well, I mean, obviously Amazon is going to push that framing,
right?
And I think people who are anti-union are always going to be anti-union, and
no matter
what. Right. And I think our response has really been, this is about workers' rights, right? Like Amazon didn't want to put up with workers' rights anymore, right? That workers having rights, whether it be to unionize, whether it be to health and safety, whether it be to unjust dismissal. So Amazon was just fed up with the fact that workers in Quebec were standing up for their basic rights, right? And I think, and if a company doesn't want to respect that, then they shouldn't be operating here. Right? And you can't blame the union for workers standing up to choose to have a union, to have decent wages, to have basic health and safety, all of these things. So, you can't blame workers for trying to improve their basic work conditions. And so, I mean, I think there is a very tiny minority sentiment out there because the union drive was taking place in other workplaces too, not just in DXT4 where the union was certified.
There's other drives going on at the other locations.
Exactly.
Right,
So at Yule
right.
2, at Yule 5.
Okay, yeah. Well, that kind of. I wonder. Do you think that? Because we're talking before about how they wanted to shut down the one place that was union certified, right, as a message. But do you think? Because Amazon is being very careful about their messaging on this, right? Like all the first statement immediately was this is not because of the union. But the fact that other union drives were going on seems like to suggest that makes the argument even stronger that it was actually because of the union and because of they maybe were afraid of the risk of more unions popping up. No.
Exactly. So I mean that if the union was successful in DXC4, that it could have been successful in the other warehouses as well very rapidly. Right? And that was, I guess, Amazon's fear that it really was that this was going to just snowball.
Yeah. This seems. I feel like all this kind of goes counter to a lot of the messaging that Amazon was doing before, like in the years of in like you're telling me before about the lobbying, right? Where I have a little what was it? Amazon put out a report in 2023 called the Amazon Canada Impact Report. Since 2010, we've made direct investments in our Canadian operations of more than 40 billion. In the pamphlet, it also says they say. Amazon is a powerful engine of growth for the Canadian economy through innovation, investments, and job creation. Amazon is helping transform the potential of communities from coast to coast, and yet here they are leaving. Seems kind of hypocritical, I would say even. Can you tell me a bit about their lobbying efforts?
Well, I mean, Amazon has always been, first and foremost, very concerned about the law and regulations and a lot of these Silicon Valley and sort of digital companies are always, they made their profits and money through not being regulated, right? You look at some of the other examples, not Amazon related, right? Law 22 in California around Uber and whether Uber or not is an employer or employee. All these tech companies poured in hundreds of $1,000,000 to fight that referendum. Right? It had nothing to do with Amazon. Even Amazon chipped in, right? And because they want no regulation on what they do, because that's where they profit. And so Amazon has spent all of this money to be able to so in the Canadian context, you can go onto the Canadian Lobby Registry website, the federal government website, and you can see the Amazon lobbies hundreds of times a year, meeting with all of the ministries, sometimes multiple times, over trade barriers, over access to Amazon Web Services contracts, putting in place data centers. And we see the results of that, right? So between 2018 till now, it's estimated that there's over $100 million in contracts with Quebec. And on top of it, cheap hydro that Amazon gets for its data center here in Quebec, right?
They get a reduced rate, or is just
They get a reduced rate.
wow? Okay, yeah.
Amazon video games. We know publicly, the video game industry is actually highly subsidized, right? There's a great piece in NPR about it, and this is not just about Amazon, but like for all employers. There's like a 25% wage subsidy to bring in jobs for the video game industry. So Amazon takes advantage of that, right? And Amazon has a major video game studio here in Montreal on top of the data center, on top of the Amazon Web Services contract. Because, when people think about Amazon, they think about there's just my package at my door. Amazon is an ecosystem of multiple businesses, right? And so it's what they call a flywheel. And so Amazon's able to use one after the other. We'll create jobs in these warehouses if you give us a contract for Amazon Web Services, right? And also the pride of having an Amazon shows that, Amazon facilities or an Amazon studio or a data center, or what happened with HQ2 is that the sort of what happens to your city or to your region is that it claims that you're good for business. You're open to investors. And so Amazon has always been relying on the government on many levels. So on municipal governments, on provincial governments, on, on the federal government. So Amazon lobbies hundreds of times a year. Their main public relations person in Canada is someone who worked in the Canadian Embassy in Washington, again under the Liberals, right? So there's these clear patterns that Amazon is concerned about, not just its public image, but how it makes money from our public wealth, our public resources. Another example is Jeff Bezos' home. This is not about Canada. Jeff Bezos has a pretty spectacular mansion in Washington, D.C. It's not near his primary residence, but essentially a lot of commentators say it's a lobbying mansion, right? He hosts parties for politicians,
Of course.
and whatnot. And so this is Amazon's MO because, Amazon logistics when we think about e-commerce, it's the bulk of Amazon's revenue, but it's almost none of the profit. All of Amazon's profit comes from Amazon Web Services.
That's fascinating. I think you bring up HQ too. I think Montreal had its own kind of efforts, right, trying to attract that here, which is kind of I wonder how those people feel nowadays with Amazon saying that they're going to leave Quebec. But
Well, I'm glad it failed and it didn't go through because it was never going to bring anything positive to this city, right?
So
this is more gentrification, more precarity, a bigger housing crisis. This is all it was going to create.
it would have fed into those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and our city would be more in debt because we were going to subsidize new HQ too.
Yeah. It seems. I mean, before you talk about how Amazon would be like a G20 country, right? Just based on the amount of money kind of going around. I always think about like these things. It's almost like they have like ambassadors, right? I think about all this kind of lobbying efforts. And then it's funny that they use someone who worked at the embassy, right? Because they almost seem to fulfill that same kind of role with Amazon. Before we were talking about AWS, the Amazon Web Service contracts, very popular contracts with the government. There has been generally most people are pushing back on Amazon for this, right? We were talking before about even what was his name? The federal innovation minister, François-Philippe Champagne, he expressed dismay and frustration, sent a big open letter to the CEO of Amazon. Legault, not quite against it, despite this sort of being a perfect thing. I'm kind of curious what you make of the political responses to this in federal and provincial politics.
I think the timing of it is fascinating, both for us and, this bigger moment, right? Talking earlier was that
the Trump's inauguration happening. Jeff is there.
Jeff is there. The oligarchs are all there behind them. And they're going to feel that they have unending power and that they're going to fight unions and the left and they're going to get tax cuts and everything they want now, right? They're masters of the universe, right? The Gilded Age, the new Gilded Age. And at the same time, on the flip side, we have this moment of nationalism here because of the tariff threats, right? Which, so how do we respond and how do we think about Canada first or Quebec first? And, Alberta should get its act together and sit down with Canada and not concede anything to Trump. And, in that moment, no politician could come out against it, right? Even though there's this sort of perfect storm where even for someone like Legault doesn't care about immigrants, the bulk of the people that work at Amazon. Legault hates unions, so the fact is this is like a double win for him. But the fact is it looks like this, if you didn't stand up to Amazon as this major American corporation that came, bled us, and then left, I think would be a political suicide at this moment, right? So no one can come out against it, which is an interesting moment for workers and allies to really to play on. Is these companies come, they have no respect for our laws, no respect for our society, and no respect for our workers, right? I mean, and without trying to be over playing into the nationalism into it, but there is a thing saying that Amazon has a responsibility to these communities and these societies. And
Especially if that's something that they themselves are saying, right?
Yeah.
They're telling about the potential to transform communities from coast to coast.
Yeah.
I
Instead
guess for the
of
worse.
for the
Yeah,
much for the
yeah,
worse,
yeah.
right? And I mean, even Legault, the first thing he said, it was a bit silly. I don't think he knew fully what was going on. He came out of the CAC retreat meeting, and he said, "Well, when he was asked about Amazon closing, he was like, well, the Canadians won last night, and I still didn't drink my orange juice."
7 entrepôts Amazon fermés.
Le Canadien a encore gagné.
Oui, ça, je sais, mais
Je n'ai pas bu d'orange ce matin. Pas de jus d'orange.
I think, which was like a play on I'm boycotting Florida,
Right.
right? And so there's
Who drinks orange juice out of celebration? But right, yeah. You're talking about this more of a nationalism, right? In response to Trump's
tariffs. So I mean, on this flip side, which has kind of been working in, there's this talk now. We're going to end the contracts. Well, that's what the federal innovation minister said.
right. He's threatening to pull out those AWS contracts.
And even the Quebec government is looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's tough talk to appease people politically
Sure.
and just let time go on, or whether this is real action, is going to depend on us on the ground.
Right. Yeah. Tell me a bit about what stuff is like on the ground. I think you told me just you had the first workers' assembly since the announcement. What was that like?
So there's a few. I mean, we had our first workers' assembly on Sunday. Brought workers both from the unionized warehouse, the other warehouses, to talk about how they feel, what their demands are. There was 50 workers. People were, deeply upset, deeply concerned. People thought that they were going to make a life with Amazon. And now they're just left in the cold, and so workers, let out their frustrations. We figured out how we can support them, but we focused really on what demands workers want. And so workers feel what Amazon is telling the public and telling them, we're giving them 14 weeks and we're being generous and there's going to be support. These are all in the basic minimal labor standards in Quebec.
Right.
In fact,
They're offering the minimum,
they're offering the minimum.
the required amount, even.
The required amount. And we don't even know if everyone's going to get the required amount. That's another issue that we're going to have to fight on. Then, so workers are saying, we want 1 year. We want 1 year. Amazon can afford it. One of the largest corporations on the planet. It can give us 1 year. This was pre-calculated. It has nothing to do with the economy. And so we can find another job for people who don't get, and also 1 year for everyone. So regardless, white badge, blue badge, subcontractor, laid off before the closure announcement. Amazon made a bunch of layoffs in January. So even though they're not related
To this big one, yeah.
we're saying that they are. So we want everyone included and also benefits extended until 1 year. And also we want the Canadian government to end its contract, both the Canadian and Quebec government. So there was that sentiment, and workers were upset. Workers were, we got to protest. We have to organize. Workers are starting with an open letter. Workers are going to begin to actually workers are calling for a petition, and protests will start being organized very soon.
The gears are turning.
Yeah. So the wheels are turning, and it was a first step to bring workers in this kind of democratic process where workers can take the lead in terms of really what they want.
Of course, yeah.
Also, workers are supporting the call for boycott. So
Yes, that was another big movement that started beginning now from the consumer base. A lot of people are calling for a boycott of Amazon. I think it kind of reminds me of this that boycott of Loblaws and other Loblaws firms last year, which seemed to be very successful. I think that'd be quite the win to get people to just delete their memberships, to stop buying from Amazon. I know there's that one not to detract from this point about on the ground workers, but I know in Cult Montreal recently, Taylor C. Noakes wrote that piece about how Amazon was leaving good riddance, right? And I think he, of course, expresses sympathy for the workers who are laid off, but he kind of makes the point about this is an opportunity, right, to go shop local or to go kind of like keep the money sort of in Quebec. I guess there is sort of like a maybe a nationalist kind of like vibe to that we were talking about before. But I'm kind of curious what you make of that.
Well, there is a real question of its model, right? Like its model, the reason why it's so successful and it expands is not because it's technological innovation, but it just squeezes everyone, right? So it squeezes its suppliers. So if you talk to small book presses, Amazon will force these publishers, be like, look, we'll buy thousands of your books, but we want them at this price. Right? So then these small book publishers that's going to be lower than I'm going to sell at the bookstore.
Right.
So then they crush the bookstore by by being able to sell these books online cheaper than they would be at the bookstore or with another delivery option. So they squeeze suppliers. If fulfillment by Amazon, it turns people's homes into warehouses essentially. You do destroy local businesses and small communities. And then Amazon uses all of that wealth and all of that power to push around governments, to treat workers like crap and feel that they're above the law. Like, what kind of model is that? Like, just pick up and go to the dep.
Right, yeah.
Like,
go
for a walk. Maybe we actually don't need this.
The
right?
convenience.
The convenience at some point is not worth it, right? Like, if the return market on goods is the size of the U.S. military, we have like a fundamental problem, right? Like, there's a bigger question about what Amazon represents.
Right.
And I think this is there's a more existential question. There's the immediate question of what workers want and our laws in this moment and the right to unionize. But there's a bigger question of our economic model that's kind of allowed this to happen.
Well, thank you for that. Where can people keep track of or support the Amazon Workers Committee? So
there's a few things. So you can go to the Immigrant Workers Center webpage, Facebook. You can also go to EC Boycott Amazon on Facebook or boycottamazon.ca. And those are the two places, I think, with the most constant updates of actions and what's taking place and how to support Amazon workers.
Nice. This could be, I think, the beginning of something pretty big, at least in terms of responses, right?
I think so too. I think it's despite everyone being depressed, not just because of what Amazon's doing, because of what we're seeing around the world, I think this is a real flashpoint of solidarity, of thinking about deeper questions, about thinking about what does it mean for us now to be living in the second Gilded Age and with Trump at the helm. So there's a lot of these bigger questions that people are like, well, how do we resist it? And I think this campaign has become a concrete way to do that.
Incredible. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the show, Mustafa.
Thank you so much, Calden, for having me on today.
Of course. That was Mustafa Henaway, community organizer with the Immigrant Workers Center, writer, author of the book Essential Work, Disposable Workers. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. That's our episode today. Thank you very much for listening. Amazon. Are you an Amazon Prime member? Consider your membership. What's it worth? And give the Amazon Workers Committee a follow. And consider boycotting Amazon too, I guess. Take care, everyone. Thanks.